Welcome to Fellowship Safaris, conversations about people of color and their journeys to subspecialist training in their countries of origin and around the world. Hi everyone, and welcome to Fellowship Safaris podcast season 3. I absolutely cannot imagine and believe how far we've gotten. My name is Dr. Njeri Karianjahi. I'm a consultant pediatrician and adolescent medicine specialist, and I am the curator and the host of Fellowship Safaris podcast. The past year was one of all the warm, fuzzy feelings, and at the same time was a journey of discovery for me. It had actually started in terms of me wanting to process my transition from being an international medical graduate or an adolescent medicine fellow into an adolescent medicine specialist and consultant pediatrician back in Kenya. And in addition to that, I had wanted to make meaning of what my experience had been. I kind of wondered what other stories there are out there, considering I felt that my story would help somebody. And so there may be other people of color in our country, around the world, who would also have stories of impact. The point of the podcast had been to, move from this title of IMG or International Medical Graduate and sort of get a space where I can share information, where we can share tips about working towards subspecialist or fellowship training, and also give other people and other former fellows an opportunity to make meaning of their medical education experiences for them as learners, for their loved ones who may have gone with them or may have stayed behind while they traveled to a different country or a different continent, and then also pass on key information that you typically wouldn't get on the websites where you're looking for these subspecialist trainings. Some of the things and some of the stories that I had were surprising, pleasantly surprising. Some gutted me, to be very, very honest, while others just genuinely made me laugh. That laughter from the stomach. So just thinking back through what sort of themes we had, there were themes around what sort of communication you would start having with your loved one, with your kids, with people in your department. And the kind of communication ranged from being given time off and trying to negotiate for that versus having conversations with your spouse or with your children, and the impact the fellowship had on family. In season 1, if you look through, I think with every episode, there's somebody who mentions a story concerning family. So I would really, really urge you to take a listen to the different family dynamics that were at play for different people as they were going into their subspecialist training. The other thing that stood out for me is the partnerships that came up during the fellowship process. I remember one of the doctors, Dr. Naomi, who's now a pediatric cardiologist, was sharing that this is our fellowship, meaning her and her family, her and her partner, her husband, they were doing this together.
I was scared. I was like, so when I'm gone, I hope everything will be fine. I hope everything will be taken care of. The surety from family, the surety from my husband that's going to be okay. Let's do this. It's all of us doing it. It's not only you. Yeah, I had this backing for, it's not only your fellowship, it is our fellowship. So let's do it.
One of the themes that came out pretty strongly was the theme around mentorship and the importance of being able to identify good mentors, and not only identify good mentors, but also work towards being a great mentor and being a bridge yourself.
I am not sure that I had thought about it in terms of I'm looking for a mentor in the first place. But then now looking back, that's truly what I was doing. I was actually looking for a mentor.
I am one of those people who was very slow in picking up mentorship in my career. But thinking about it, I should say probably I did follow people quietly without officially announcing I'm your mentee.
Yeah, that was mentorship par excellence.
When I applied, my mentors helped me in that.
I am available for mentorship and also just partnering in pursuit for surgical care.
In season 1 and in season 2, we had various specialists talking about the shoulders on which they stand themselves and the importance of having taken time, having conversations, modeling and mirroring what some of their predecessors were doing, and also just getting those words of wisdom around the selection of fellowships that they had. I know for me, mentorship has been a continuous theme. Even after I was done with my fellowship, a lot of my mentors continue to walk with me, continue to check in, because the reality of being in that pioneer stage, while on paper it sounds fantastic, the reality of it is that it can get quite daunting. The amount of work is so great. And at the same time, there's such a wonderful opportunity to be able to make a difference one step at a time. And if you are not able to identify a mentor in the area of specialty that you're thinking about going into, imagine send me an email on fellowshipsafaris@gmail.com. And part of my contribution towards your goals would be to try and connect you with somebody who you can begin a conversation with. And then we can work at it from there. Sawa. It's really also interesting to have seen the thought process in the male subspecialists versus the female subspecialists. We're both sort of going into the same fields, but we find that based on society's norms, the things that ladies think about versus gentlemen ends up being a little bit different. And it was interesting to see the different approaches where you're having to make this big decision for yourself, for your family, with your family, and the impact it has on the other roles you have in your life.
I did research for Canada, checked South Africa, looked at the number of years that I would be working in these places. And then remember that I am a mother.
Yeah, so when I was studying, my wife was pregnant and she found out that she was pregnant when I was away. So that was also quite scary.
My initial conversation with my husband, when I told him that now I'm considering a Canadian fellowship, he was not really very open, given that at that time I was pregnant. And he thought like we can wait for maybe 2 or 3 years when our kids are older. Why should we go now?
So my wife was very supportive. When that letter came, it's like you need to go. There was no discussion. It was you are going.
Another really important thing that cannot be understated is mental health and the importance of, sort of gauging where you're at from a mental health perspective, as well as being able to quickly identify what are the mental health supports that are available for you during your fellowship. I think for a lot of healthcare professionals, the thing that we were taught how to do during our training was put aside your thoughts, your feelings about a particular scenario and focus on the healthcare plan and focus on what this patient needs in the moment, which, let me speak for myself, really had an impact in terms of my ability to have empathy for patients. I was talking about this the other day with a friend of mine in terms of our ability to have empathy was in some ways negatively impacted during our training because it wasn't said very explicitly, but then you're not supposed to feel all your feelings for various reasons. It's going to blur how you make decisions. It's going to impact, how you view a particular person. But then on the flip side, empathy is such a key component of the healthcare experience, and especially as a subspecialist where you're taking care of a particular thing. And so just hearing how mental health ties in with our ability to empathize was one of those themes that I found to be quite interesting, because on the flip side, in terms of mental health, like if you get into my episode, I actually talk about how I had not realized that I would tap into the mental health resources during my fellowship until I was in my fellowship and faced some challenges. I also think about Dr. Rose Munge, who takes us through her journey of sort of like self-discovery from a mental health perspective during her fellowship. And I would really encourage you to take a listen to those episodes again, because the elements about mental health cannot be understated.
Towards the end of my first year, because everything was so heavy, the mental was starting to affect the physical. So, you're not sleeping well, you're getting insomnia, there's weight gain. And because I am a comfort eater, I was eating junk food. I was not watching what I was eating. I was working long, crazy hours, not sleeping, looking for a way out. I started relying a little bit. When you get home and you want a drink, and then the next day you want a drink, and then the third day you want a drink, there's a problem. You're like, it's a bit much. So when I realized I was heading down that road, and then it's not helping me, when I think my BPs went up a bit, and I was like, this is not healthy. So now let's give it the full chance. Let's actually talk, use the reflective seminar. Then from there, now, if that's working, then start working out.
It's really, really important for you, when you're going into those spaces, to identify what are the support structures that you'll have when you start your fellowship, whether it's in your country of origin or it's in another country. What are the mental health supports that are there in place? And back home, and by home, I mean whatever is more familiar to you, whether it's family, whether it's close friends who've become family, who are your support people? And you need to put a plan in place with your people, checking in on them checking in on you, having spaces where you can vent and have genuine conversation, or even a day when you just sit in silence together. You're allowed to do that. It's really important for you to think about these things and prepare for them adequately, because fellowship training is very intense. Medical education experiences can be highly stressful, especially when you get into a space where it's a completely different schema of learning and training, which is different from what you are used to. So you're trying to adjust to that, while also at the same time trying to learn, and at the same time trying to prove yourself in those spaces. So some of those things, and this list is by no means exhaustive, can contribute to the amount of stress that you're experiencing. So I don't know, I could go on about mental health, but it cannot be understated. It's super duper important for you to hone in on what's important for your mental health, what will help sustain your mental health. I liked the fact that people like Dorcas Mushiri, an obstetric gynecologist who is specializing in endocrinology, talked about her love of books and her love of stories and how that helped her. And also just talking to, other people in the podcast episodes who were able to talk about different things that helped them cope in one way or another during their fellowship training. So look out for those pro tips from a mental health perspective. One of the greatest discoveries for me is that narrative medicine is what sort of pushed me into this space where I wanted to be able to just hear people's stories and just sort of get a sense of what they did to make meaning of their experiences. Narrative medicine is one of the newer subspecialties, and what it aims to do is to be able to look at those clinical encounters and clinical experiences and make meaning of those interactions between patient and clinician, both from the patient's perspective and also from the clinician's perspective. So in the context of the podcast, I have focused mainly on the clinicians and really taken even a further, focus in terms of their medical education, thoughts and processes. And so my narrative medicine journey has brought me to this place where I'm hoping that we are all on this safari together as we discover different aspects. For me, it's one of those experiences that for me has been sort of like learning more about it in a sort of like low pressure environment, if I would say, in the sense that getting to hear the story, I do get to hear about some clinical experiences, but largely the story behind the different doctors and the different healthcare professionals and the impact it has had and the ripple effect it has had on how they practice, on how they interact with the world and how the world interacts with them. I am hoping that people will have better insight into what our lives are like and have more empathy for your healthcare professional. So that's just like my tiny contribution in terms of narrative medicine. So one of the things that I found really, really exciting to be able to interact with over the past year is the feedback that I got from various people. There are people who would text and write back and say, hey, really inspiring stories from various guests that we've had on the podcast and how inspiring their stories were. I remember there was one particular feedback that we'd gotten about the interview that had been done by Dr. Mwangombe. The comment was a very inspiring success story crystallizing what endurance and faith in God can do. It was also, noted like we need to share it with more people, and it made the person who was listening very, very proud. And for me, that really touched and warmed my heart, because that was the goal of being able to share the stories and experiences. Somebody else made a comment and said they were really happy to have heard about Dr. Leslie, who enlightened the leadership position and the various things that have been put in place, like in the Canadian context, in terms of the supports that should be in place for international medical graduates who are going through their fellowship training. And also Chris Trevelyan's episode that talked about the fellowship experience and how it has been metabolized by various fellows and how much that touched the person who was listening to it at that point, especially when he talked about the various struggles that fellows go through and just having the courage to have that kind of conversation. There was somebody who actually said, this resonates so much with my own relative experience, and I wish this podcast had been there before I started my fellowship. And thank you for putting together a very priceless gem for fellows to be and past fellows. And somebody else said, I'm sharing this with my juniors who are thinking about starting their subspecialty training. Those are just some of the comments that we received on social media, on WhatsApp, on Gmail. And I would like to say a big thank you to those who are able to give their responses and were able to give their feedback, because through your feedback, we're able to then reflect it to the guests who've been on the show, as well as see ways that we can be able to improve how we bring this podcast to you. So please keep the feedback coming. It's valuable to us. And we are eager as a team to hear about what do you think about the Fellowship Safaris podcast. So the preparation for season 3 has been character development in a number of ways. And let me explain why. I want to start by saying a big thank you to the listeners who made suggestions of guests. And out of those suggestions, you shared a phone number with me or an email address or a social media handle. And I sought out some of these wonderful people, and I'm going to have the opportunity and the privilege to share some of their wonderful stories with you. So asanteni sana for those hookups, asanteni. It's also been amazing to experience varied dialects and conversations and just be in awe and also learn as they're taking me on their medical education safaris. And I really want for you to join me on these safaris and learn and track along with me. Season 3 is also chock full of pro tips about various things in the medical education experience. various ways that you can prepare for interviews, various things that you need to look out for when you're trying to hone in on a particular subspecialty or a specific medical fellowship. So I really, really urge you to listen out and re-listen for various pro tips, because we have them just set up for you, for your benefit. In addition to that, we have also started a resource alert. And what the resource alert is, after the episode, in the notes, we will be having various links and various ways that you can be able to plug in even to more resources that help you in the decision-making process when it comes to the medical education journey you're on, or the fellowships that you're thinking about, or even just, out of curiosity, ways that you can be able to plug in and support a learner, either through, material resource like sponsoring them, or even being able to know other ways to be able to support fellows. So I am super duper excited. Take a listen to what we have in store for you this season.
Even when you've done fellowship and you've done all the things that you think you should do, you still have to keep your skills going up.
With every interaction you have, try and learn as much as possible.
I think it's really important, one, to go for fellowship training, but your reasons have to be very clear in your mind.
Looking back 5, 10, 20 years, would you be able to live with the decision that you did?
I'm so glad you stayed tuned. Please get the word out and share it with at least 3 people. Make this episode like a chain letter. Share it, share it, share it. Come back for the next leg of our safari, where we'll be talking about...
I keep telling people, now I'm coming to the point of my life where half my life has been involved in studying the human body or medicine in some form or the other. But yes, the surgical journey really, I don't think it ever stops, because even when you've done fellowship and you've done all the things that you think you should do, you still have to keep your skills going up.
Listeners are advised to use their own judgment and discretion when applying any information discussed in this and all podcast episodes to their specific situation. Always seek the advice of a qualified professional if you have any concerns or questions regarding a particular subject matter. You can find this and other episodes of this podcast on our website at www.fellowshipsafaris.org. You can also find all our episodes on all podcast platforms. Reach out to us on social media as Fellowship Safaris on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, and our Twitter handle is @fellowshipsafar. You could also send us an email on fellowshipsafaris@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you and interacting with what you have to say about the Fellowship Safaris podcast. It takes a village to make this podcast. The executive producer and original music is done by Mokavi Maweu. The sound engineer is Tevin Sudi, with thanks to AQ Studios. Graphic design was done by Benjamin Mboya. We would like to give a special shout out to Josephine Karianjahi and Melissa Mbogwa of Africa Podfest. All rights reserved by Dr. Njeri Karianjahi and the Fellowship Safaris podcast.